A Tiny Revolution features adults having adult conversations, which means that adult language is probably going to be present, just so you know. Hey friends, you're listening to another episode of A Tiny Revolution, a podcast about ordinary people living revolutionary lives. I'm Kevin Garcia. Welcome back to you and also to myself, because last week I was sick as a dog, boo. I went to the doctor because I had like 102 fever and I'm throwing up. I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I think I have the flu. Turns out not to be the flu, but something kind of gross, so we're not going to go into that. But it took me about a week to recover, and then I was traveling in New York to speak at Artisan Church, which was so much fun. So thank you to Anna and Elliot Voss for hosting me with their delightful children in their home, and I had such a good time there. And thank you to the people of Artisan Church for putting up with my weirdness for one morning. You can catch that podcast on the Artisan Church podcast, so go check that out. I also am going to upload the audio to my Patreon supporters in a little video, so if you want to watch it, it's a little bit of bonus content for you. You just have to become a Patreon supporter at even just a little as $1 a month. Go check that out, boo-boo. Today's podcast, we are talking to my friend Amber Cantorna, someone who's been on the podcast before, and she's coming back because she's coming out with her second book. Actually, her book came out last week, if memory serves me, and that's when the podcast was supposed to premiere. So sorry I'm getting this out a week late, but that is how the cookie crumbles, as it were. Amber Cantorna is an author, speaker, and a wife and a dog mom of 2. She's an author, blogger, and national speaker focusing her work around the topics of faith and queer identity. She's the author of Refocusing My Family and her newest book, Unashamed, a coming out guide for LGBTQ Christians. It's the first resource of its kind to provide practical tools and tips for LGBTQ people of faith navigating their coming out process. She's also someone who grew up homeschooled. She's the daughter of the 30-plus years executive of Focus on the Family, and she's gay. So that's complicated, and that's also what led her into this field. Losing everything over the one defining moment of authenticity has propelled her forward into a world of helping other people dissolve shame, foster self-acceptance, reconcile their faith and sexuality, and navigate their own coming out process. Amber is a delightful human. I've enjoyed getting to know her over these past few years, and I think that you're absolutely going to love our conversation today. So go ahead and grab your cup of tea, coffee, whatever you're drinking today, BB, and let's dive into this conversation with my friend, Amber Cantorna.
Well, I currently am primarily just working with LGBT people who come from conservative faith backgrounds and helping them navigate their coming out process. I grew up very conservative Christian. My dad has been an executive at Focus on the Family for 30 years. And so I grew up in a very much a Christian bubble in Colorado Springs and really didn't have much diversity or exposure to what we would call the outside world, really any of my life. So being that I was homeschooled, being that I was really cocooned in a Christian bubble, being that I was steeped in purity culture, I was never able to identify my sexual orientation early on, because you just were under the belief that if you did what God asked of you and you followed God's will for your life, that someday you would meet the perfect person and your knight in shining armor would come in on a white horse, And so I never, never have sex before marriage, and you just wait and do the will of God and great things will happen for you. And so I never dated at all growing up. And that really kind of blinded me from being able to recognize that I was gay at a younger age. So I didn't realize it until I was in my early 20s, and it took me several years to kind of navigate that reconciliation of faith and sexuality, and that was extremely hard and full of shame, and it took a long time to navigate that, so I get how hard that journey is. And then when I came out to my family, they completely disowned me for being gay, and not only just being gay, but being gay and still believing I could be a Christian, I think was part of that. And so I now work full-time helping other people navigate that journey successfully, because I have met so many people since my last book, since Refocusing My Family released. I have met and gotten emails from hundreds and hundreds of people with very similar stories. Your dad does not have to work at Focus for you to be steeped in that type of
Oh yeah.
culture and mentality. And so this spreads far and wide around the globe. I've heard from people, missionary kids and pastors' kids all over the world that are struggling with these same ideas and same concepts. And so that's really what birthed this next book, Unashamed, is taking all the most commonly asked questions that I get from people, like, how do I know if I'm ready to come out? And what if my parents are in ministry? Or what if I'm in ministry? Or what if my partner's not out? Or all these really common questions that I seem to get over and over. And then also the stories of other people that have given me permission to share them. And I put it all into a very practical book that takes a holistic approach of really helping them navigate, starting with things like demolishing their own internalized homophobia,
Yes.
and getting rid of that, because you really can't go anywhere else until you recognize and name that. So starting with naming that and recognizing it for what it is, and being able to accept yourself, and then moving towards being able to tell others about who you are in the world. And things like establishing healthy boundaries and grieving loss, and just all these different things that I think are core key elements to our coming out process, and that I encounter in the people I meet over and over.
Dang, that is actually a very fantastic synopsis of all your work. Like, it's like you speak publicly about this stuff.
Gee, I wonder. No.
Well, first of all, thank you for writing this. And you know what's so funny is that, like, right before this book got announced, I was thinking, I'm just like, you know what? There's not like a guide out there. And as soon as I said, damn it, she got to it first. but I'm thrilled because, like, I think what sets your work apart from a lot of people is your social location to, like, the very inside core of, like, conservative Christian land, and your proximity to that. Where so many queer kids are finding themselves in, like, very similar positions, like you said, and, like, needing to have kind of like that touchstone of someone who says, like, I know exactly what you're going through. Because I feel like, again, depending on your social location, like, a lot of people, like, might not be able to relate to being homeschooled or relate to only living in, like, Christian cocoon world, because, like, that was very similar for me.
Well, and when I went on tour last year to share my story, I had some people that were driving like 4 and 5 hours to come hear me speak, because they were so desperate to have a story they could relate to and meet someone that understood what they were going through. And so that really moved me too, to see how vast and wide this story reaches, and how common it is among people. And they just want to be heard. They want to be seen. They want to know that it's okay to be who they are, you know? And so that really opened my eyes too, to just how far and wide this really reaches and how needed it is.
Yeah, it's like, and there's also, I feel like there's a lot of resources around, like, coming out, like, when to know you're ready to come out. Like, that can be really, really general. I think coming out within religious context is very different, and B, it takes a different kind of approach in some ways, because if we have to, like you said, not only, like, unpack, like, internalized homophobia and transphobia, queerphobia across the board, but then in addition to that, like, so many of us, like, have to wrestle with, like, the theological questions, and then also are more likely to have to, well, I don't want to say more likely, I don't have the statistic on it, but, like, we have to deal with our families in some ways, and sometimes that's not always easy.
And you have to deal with your faith and your relationship with God. Like, it's all encompassing. It's not just one part of who you are. It's all of your whole world, and it impacts every area of your life, especially for those that come from conservative faith backgrounds, because not only is your current life at stake, but your eternal life is at stake, and your relationships are at stake, and your church, and it's all encompassing. And so it stretches so much further than some other, it's just so much more complicated and nuanced.
Right. I highlighted a couple places in the book that I wanted to just, like, hear you speak on a little bit. And there's, like, the role of shame, and then real fear versus false fear. I thought that was, like, such a fantastic way of just, like, really summing it up. Just, like, there are legitimate fears within the coming out process as a queer person.
Absolutely.
So when you started first your coming out process, like, what was your shame and fear, like, surrounding, and then how did you personally work through those things?
Well, I don't think it was until I was writing my book. I was on a podcast with somebody, fairly early on before the Refocusing My Family released, and we were talking about shame. And I just kind of had this light bulb moment of like, oh my gosh, I feel like my entire life has a root of shame somewhere. Like that has been a thread through my entire life that's carried me. And I think that that is a big piece of evangelical Christianity, that they
Yes.
kind of embed fear and shame underneath, as a way to get you to follow the rules of religion. And I don't believe that that's how we are supposed to live. We should not be afraid of God or afraid of ourselves or afraid of our eternal destiny but I feel like so much of evangelical Christianity is just grounded in fear, whether people realize it or not. And that really is the backdrop of what dictates how people act. And so I think recognizing that and the role that it has in your own life can be very liberating and freeing and eye-opening, because it really was for me. And I think once you name that, then you're able to move forward into realizing, well, there are some things that I legitimately am afraid of that are true. I'm afraid of losing my job, or I'm afraid of being kicked out of my church, or I'm afraid of how my family is going to respond to me. Those are legitimate fears that you have to consider when coming out. And they certainly were for me, and I certainly lost a lot. But there are other fears that are not as legitimate that people try to make legitimate in your mind. And one of the big ones that I try to unpack in the book is how God sees you, because people make it out to seem that you are unacceptable in the eyes of God as a queer person, and that you will go to hell forever and you will burn in eternity, and you're the cause of all these problems in the world. And those are not real fears. If you really take apart the Bible and you look at who Jesus was and you look at what the Bible says, God loves you for who you are. And I believe that God created you to be who you are and to let your diversity shine in the world, to better display the diversity of God. So it's not something to be ashamed of or to be afraid of. God really loves and adores you for exactly who you are and created you such, for the purpose of God's revealing themselves. So I really try to emphasize that a lot, and even unpack certain scriptures that show the diversity of God to help people understand just how beautiful that is when you let that shine in the world.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be great if like the entirety of Christian faith was just like centered around that? I mean, that was the truth that drew us all in, right? Was that like God's love is for all people. God's heart is for the liberation of all people. Like that's the thing that like, I mean, I remember at 9 years old when I got baptized, like I was such like a weird kid and I was like kind of picked on all the time. And so when I heard about a Jesus who chose like the outcast of the world, the kind of Jesus who chose like the second best, to be his disciples, it was like, I resonate with that so much. And then like to like even what I grew up into was this idea that you had to be the best, you had to be the winner, you had to like have all your ducks in a row to be a Christian, you had to believe the right things. And it was it was so much about obedience and not grace and forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. Well, and they get you in the door with the idea that God's love is conditional, but as you stay in that environment, what they teach is really very opposite. They are teaching that God's love is conditional, that God will not love you if you do this. God will not love you if you have. It's a hierarchy of measuring up. You need to spend an hour in Bible study every day. You need to pray and fast. You need to do all these things to make yourself worthy before God. You don't have to do anything to make yourself worthy before God. God loves you exactly as you are. So you don't have to work your way up that hierarchy of that ladder of works-based religion. You don't have to do anything to be accepted by God. And so I think that's where evangelical Christianity has gone wrong, is they kind of display this myth that God's love is unconditional, when really their teachings say something else, and that they don't say that outright. So it gets kind of embedded in you subconsciously, and you don't even realize it until it costs you something. And so like with my family, like they would always say our love is unconditional, God's love is unconditional. But that wasn't really true, because when I needed them the most, when I needed their love the most, they walked out
Right.
on me. So that love wasn't really conditional, and they didn't believe that God's love was truly conditional, or they wouldn't be so afraid of me going to hell.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I
That.
think that the conditional versus unconditional love is a big trip up for a lot of people, and that myth needs to be broken as well.
Yeah, and I think also to name that conditional love, because like
Yeah.
that's exactly what it is. In when I came out, or like I was like on like the cusp of coming out. I was kind of like side B-ish
Mhm.
for a
Mhm.
while, where I believe that it was okay. It was so interesting. Like in my mind's eye, I was thinking, it's okay for some people to be gay. Like God has revealed that to them, but God hasn't revealed that to me, and so I'm
Yeah.
gonna reveal this thing. So
Right.
that's where I was for a few years, and it was so interesting to me that when I even talked about like I wrote a blog that basically I said that I supported same-sex civil marriage, because if people aren't submitting themselves to the authority of a church, then we have no business like dictating what they should or should not do in a courtroom.
Mhm.
And so that was like my big thing, and my church was not pleased with me. um, and I'm just like, I haven't done anything. I've just stated an opinion. I'm just like, is this like a matter of salvation? And like, it was so interesting to me. I'm just like, it is like within evangelicalism, like uniformity of opinion
Mhm.
and the way we think about things
Mhm.
is so key in keeping control.
Yep.
And it was, and we can point out how like cool churches, like it's like people, and they don't see it that way. That's the thing. It's like they don't see like this commitment to unity no matter what as a problem, or see how that could like affect how people are actually viewing themselves or God or any number of things. And like it's I mean it's a fear-based culture, like
It
at
is.
the very root. I think that you really nailed it, because like if it's not fear of hell, it's fear of losing my community.
Yeah.
And both of those things are like super huge psychological torments.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I even in Unashamed, the new book, I even have a whole chapter around coping with conditional love, because so many of us get these comments like, I love you, but
Yeah.
there's always that but, there's always that caveat of, I love you, but I know this is not God's will for your life. Or I love you, but I'm not supposed to have gay friends. Or I love you, but, and there's always that caveat that's like a, a condition for their love. And
Hmm.
that's, like you said, psychological torment. That's very hard to grapple with. And what do you do with that? And how do you cope with that? And how do you love yourself in the midst of that?
Hmm. I think another interesting thing is the friends in our life that we keep around or choose not to keep around, where they don't see it's like, oh, you're my gay friend, I love you, and but like they're not out. It's almost just like they're loving but not affirming, whatever that
Mm-hmm,
means.
mm-hmm.
Um, and like they want to pursue relationship with you, and like I almost want to sit down and ask them sometimes, like, do you believe I'm going to hell?
Yeah,
Like, do you really think that like because like the way that you treat me, like what you say that you believe and how you treat me are two different things. You say you believe being queer is a sin, and yet on this side of it, like where you treat me like a normal, like you treat me like you've always treated me. Like, so like what's going on?
right.
Because like this is like a weird cognitive dissonance thing for me.
And they probably don't even want to think about it, like,
Mm,
because they have this belief, and then they have you right in front of them, and that feels like a conflict to them, because they know what they are supposed to believe, but then they know who you are as a person, and they love you. And so to put those things together, or to actually take the time to work through that, takes some real courage on their part, and not everybody's willing to do that.
yeah. There was a part like dead smack in the middle of your book where you were talking about like taking the leap of faith and like figuring out who in your life that you need to come out to, deciding who and who not to come out to. And so I'm wondering, like, when you're talking to people about their coming out processes, what are some things that you encourage them to think about?
When they're in the process of thinking if they're ready to come out, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, Yeah, and there's also specifically like, who do I tell first and how do I tell them? That's like the heading I'm looking at right now.
Yeah, so first I encourage them to make sure that they're ready, and I kind of take a holistic approach of looking at, are you emotionally ready? Are you physically ready? Are you spiritually ready? Do you have community support? Do you have financial resources to live on your own? Like I take them through kind of this holistic approach of seeing if they're actually ready to do this. And a key thing that I emphasize a lot is safety, because I think safety
Yeah.
trumps everything else. You have got to feel safe to be able to come out. And if you do not, then it's not time for you to come out. You don't come out in the midst of feeling extremely unsafe and insecure. Like you need to feel secure in who you are, in your relationship with God, in your support system, to be able to really navigate that with the least amount of collateral damage. And so when they are ready to come out, I encourage them to think about kind of their spheres of influence and pick somebody that they are pretty sure is going to be affirming, because you want your first experience to be a positive one. And so pick somebody that you are pretty sure is going to embrace who you are and celebrate that with you, because you need that affirmation, and that will give you confidence and courage to go to the next one. And then I kind of encourage people to kind of start on the outside of their spheres of influence, start with acquaintances, because if they aren't happy about it, it's not going to affect you as much as if it's your parents or your brother or your sister or your closest friends. So kind of start out and then work your way in as you're ready and able, because that will help you kind of gain confidence along the way.
Right.
So I
And
encourage them to
think
take that approach.
something that just came to mind for me, and because I am such an internet human, I first connected with my first, queer friends and queer Christian friends through the Twitterverse. And because I was able to connect with people through that, I got in touch with the Reformation Project, et cetera, et cetera. So even if that first person you come out to is like a stranger from Twitter, like through a DM,
There's
like
some hugely supportive groups out there on Facebook and in other places where you can connect and be embraced for who you are. And that's a really freeing and liberating experience, especially when you're so afraid of how it's going to go,
Yeah, and if you live in communities where like you're the only queer person for, X number of miles.
Right.
Having that support is so, I mean, for me, like it was the thing that helped me through my coming out process in many ways, was having those internet humans to help me out.
Yep. There are people who will love and embrace you for exactly who you are. And when you find that, it feels really, really good. And it gives you the strength to kind of take that next step.
Yeah. And then like the flip side of that is like on the other side of coming out with family who is conservative, or people you love in your life, like close friends who you've known from church for so many years. I know that for me, and I'm sure for you, like there's like people that you still hold on to in some ways, and some like in many ways I had to reorient myself to those relationships in order for me to even maintain civility with some of them.
And you have to adjust your expectations.
Yeah. Because like for like I being in like the church for so long and being a part of like ministry for so long, I had like all these people who like were my ministry partners, and like they were the people who I was accountable to. They were the people who held me and like through like really, really rough times. But now it's like they just can't love me the way I need to be loved. They can't affirm. Like it's so interesting. It's like my last church, which is a non-affirming church, they like when I was still trying to work for the inclusion of LGBTQ people there, like my pastor at the time wrote me a recommendation for seminary, and yet he's the one who adopted this non-inclusive policy. I was like, I don't understand how you can write me a recommendation letter and say that I have a call on my life, and at the same time you're going to do this thing. Like those two things do not line up. And so like again, it's like you said, I have to change my expectations of what and who this person is going to be to me.
And you may have to adjust, and find some new people to take that place.
So when you are, like there's the part in your book where you're talking about boundaries and how they're not disrespectful. So many people will, like a lot of our families sometimes will like default to the shame tactic of just like, you have to engage with me because I'm your mother or my father, or like you're my sibling. Like you have to talk about this with me. but a lot of times it's like they're not really wanting to talk with you, they want to talk at
Mm-hmm.
you. So like, how did you start? Like, what does boundary making look like in your eyes?
Well, I think ultimately boundaries are meant to keep you safe, whether that's physically safe or emotionally safe or mentally safe. They help create space for you to be who you are without other people saying who you have to be. And so sometimes boundaries are verbal, sometimes they are physical space that you put between you and another person. But I kind of try to walk them through what that could possibly look like in their situation, although every situation is different and I can't ever predict every one of them. But sometimes that means boundaries around what the holidays look like and when you visit your family. Sometimes that looks like boundaries around the ways that you communicate. Sometimes that looks like boundaries around social media and who you let in on your feed and in your world and in your private space. Those all look different for different people. For me, a boundary I had to set was, my dad would say, well, Amber, you're always welcome to come home for the holidays, but Clara, my wife, will never be welcome under our roof. And so then I had to say, well, then I'm not welcome under your roof. Then I'm not coming because that's not fair to her. You would never go somewhere for the holidays where mom wasn't welcome and leave her behind. You can't expect me to do that either. She's my wife. I would never leave her home alone for the holidays and go off to spend time with you. And I'm a big believer in the fact that, because I think, especially as evangelical Christians, we tend to, can you hold on just a second? I'm sorry, Kevin.
Oh, you're totally
I've
fine.
got a puppy throwing up. Hold on.
Oh, totally fine.
Are you okay, sweetie? Let's clean it up. Is that the first one? Okay. Let me try again. Okay, are you there?
Hello, I'm
Sorry,
here.
my puppy was throwing up
No.
on my carpet.
Oh, sweet baby
I
angel.
know. I hope she's okay. She doesn't throw up very often.
She's just really stressed out. All the things that are happening in the world today. Just happen. You were saying about boundaries, about like you wouldn't leave your wife behind because she's like you, because your father would never leave his wife behind.
Right. And so I think setting boundaries like that, I'm a big believer in the fact that once you find that other person that you plan to spend the rest of your life with, and build a family around, that becomes your primal family. And you need to protect that nuclear family over your birth family that you were raised in. And so I'm a big believer in that, because often I think in evangelical Christianity we're taught that kind of your nuclear family, your birth family, is what you're supposed to protect forever, and we kind of feel guilty if we start protecting someone else. And yet I think it's very important that we realize that once you get married, that becomes your nuclear family, and that's who you need to protect above all else.
Yeah. And I would go even further with that, like just saying like I think Jesus did a lot of just like reorienting what family was, because he was just like, who is my mother and who is my father? It's like the person who is here with me,
Right.
And so I think about all the time how often I'm trying to live into this big, vast family that goes beyond just even like, a spouse, but just like, how do I have like this dedication to my really close people? Like, I think of like my best friend Miles and John, and how those are my siblings. But like more than just like being my siblings, like they're my people. And so I prize time with them. I make sure to set time. I set aside time for them. I like try to talk about more than just the weather, obviously, but like I want to. There's like this weird and interesting concept that I attended a workshop one time, and they said, what would happen if we treated our friends more like our lovers and our lovers more like our friends? Like what if we treated our lovers like, how you're always honest with like your best friends about whatever, and sometimes like it feels like weird to talk to your partner about like the hard stuff. And so this concept like really flipped it on its head for me. So like, you can like be like, if you can't be honest with your partner, like there's something wrong. Or if you're like not like, what if you treated your friends like, I want to give my friends my time and attention as well. I want to give them my affection. I want to give them my I want to give to them, period. So it's such an interesting, I think Christianity offers a lot, like, especially like queer Christianity. I feel like we offer a lot to saying like the critique of like what we've thought family always was versus what like an expansive family of God looks like.
Yeah.
So it's good.
And it's a learning process.
Oh yeah, for sure. When you were I think there's also this other thing that like the coming out process feels like it, for many folks, it is like the biggest milestone and also the biggest hurdle to get over, because we have this expectation that, I mean, I'll say it for myself. When I came out, I thought I'm going to come out and it's going to be rainbows and sunshine and like everyone's going to love me and it's going to be great and I'm stepping into the fullness of who I am. All of those things in some ways were true. There was a lot of really good stuff, but it also came with like that season of loss and like having to mourn what happened. Right. And then also on the other side of coming out, recognizing all the ways that still like I'm still unpacking internalized homophobia. Right. I'm still unpacking evangelical purity culture from my brain. I'm still like, there's still so much, like, it's not like you come out and then you're done and you can just like live your life, quote unquote. Like there's still such a process of becoming that we have to go through. And I was wondering, like, for you, like, your coming out process was obviously like very interesting, especially like with like where your family is situated within the evangelical community. But like, what were some things that you continued to learn as you came out and are still learning?
Well, I think boundaries are a big one, because you're kind of taught that boundaries are disrespectful, and so I kind of had to take a quick course in boundaries when I came out to be able to protect myself emotionally and mentally. And that was very hard for me because I wasn't used to having to set boundaries, and my parents weren't used to me setting them. And that was a process that I really had to kind of work on and start setting for myself. And I think that boundaries are never easy. Nobody loves boundaries, but it's something that I think I've gotten better at, even in simple things of not overcommitting and saying no when you're not able to do something, and those kind of things are boundaries even. So I think that's something that I definitely had to grow in, especially right after coming out, and that I continue to work on. And deprogramming your brain from the evangelical mindset, I think, takes years, if not a lifetime. Even in deconstructing your faith, like I feel like I will forever be deconstructing and reconstructing what I believe God to look like and what I believe God to express, because it's never ending. And I'm okay with that now. That doesn't intimidate me the way it used to, because that means I'm always learning and I'm always growing and seeing God in new ways. And so I love that. It used to be a very scary thing to me, and it's just not anymore. So I think those are things that I continue to really to even value about the process, because it makes me a better human being.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head. It's just like once you start the deconstruction process of all the other things, it's just like everyone's like, "Oh, I want to get to reconstruction." I'm just like, I don't think we ever really get there. Like, I feel like it's less about building a new framework in which to work, and more about I'm going to take these tools with me in my backpack and just go on the
Mm-hmm.
journey. And then along the way, some of these things are going to get too heavy, and I'm going to leave them behind and pick up new
Yep.
things that serve me and serve the world. Like the coming out process, I think, is like can be such a catalyst for people to really re-examine everything. For me, it
Yep.
also just like it was like if once I hit my queerness and confronted it, I also had the space to like learn about why do Black Lives
Right.
Matter, for
Absolutely.
example. And what what is this whole gender thing, and why do I feel a certain way? And then like it spurred me on, and I think Justin Lee said it very perfectly a couple years ago at then GCN. He said, if I wasn't gay, I don't know if I would be like recognizing grief
Right.
or
It
not.
opens your eyes to start viewing the world differently.
Mm-hmm. And allows you to become an ally to the whole of the justice
Absolutely.
movement. And I think that's super duper
Mm-hmm.
important, because it does me no good to be able to be openly queer and marry who I want to marry and be queer and Christian if if people
Right.
still
If
come
that's the
in and
only
talk
thing
to me
about you that
body.
changes.
Yeah, it really helps you get out of yourself.
It does. When you look kind of at the whole of who all is being marginalized around you and fight for their equality as well.
Yeah. There's also like a part in the book that I think is like so beautiful, and like it's towards the end of just like sitting with grief and working through like if your coming out process is painful for you and how to deal with that. So when you're talking with people who know that they're about to lose so much, like what's like the encouragement that you're giving them?
Well, I think grief is painful, but it's also very important. It's an important part of our process to let go of expectations, to let go of relationships, to let go of the things that have harmed us from bad religion, and to adjust our view of what God looks like and what we look like in that family of God. And so it's definitely a process, and I encourage people to take that time. And sometimes that comes even in waves, like you work through things for a while and then you think you're doing well, and then you need to work through some again. And I just recently went back to therapy to work through some things that were coming up again for me. And so I think that you don't need to put a timetable on that. You never really, it's not like, okay, I've arrived at my, point of being done with grief. You don't arrive at that. I wish, right?
I
Like,
am now I have grieved, and I am
I am
completely
completely grieved.
I am done.
I'm grief free. Like that doesn't happen, because things are going to come up that trigger you, and things are going to come up that's painful, and things are going to change and move and shift. And just being open to that, I guess, and being allow yourself to sit in that when it comes, rather than shaming yourself for feeling that way,
Yeah.
and just allowing yourself to go through the process of because it will make you more free. It will make you more whole to be able to do that.
Yes. And I think like grief is like, I'm such like a doing
Mm-hmm.
oriented person, and learning to sit in
Yes.
grief was the most painful process for me. A, because I don't do well with my own emotions, and B, like because as a culture, not just queer folks, but as a culture in the West, we don't do grief very well. Like it's like we're going to allow 8 days of
Right.
bereavement leave for you,
Then you have to
and
be done and be
we're
back
going
to normal
to
again
and
and
back
back
to
to
work
work.
at full
Yes.
capacity.
And people are
And
so, I think our culture is so egocentric that people care for a short amount of time, and then they get so consumed with their own lives again that they forget that you're still grieving, and it may have been a year or 2 or 3 and you're still grieving, and people kind of forget that. And so then it can often become isolating because you don't have the support through
yeah,
that whole process of grief.
yeah, I remember like this past weekend was like the 1 year anniversary of my father's death, and like I set some time aside because I knew that I was gonna just be there. And like the whole thing is like grief is not something to do.
Right.
Grief is not something to like to quote unquote process grief is like there's no action on your part besides allowing yourself to feel it all and feel like the intensity of it, like, and just I think learning to let myself cry when I needed to was a game changer for me in so many ways.
It's hard to sit with grief, especially for those of us that have been taught like you need to appear okay, you need to have it all together, you need to wear that mask and that smile. It's hard to get to that point of grieving and just sitting in that and not trying to hurry through it.
Yeah. So it's just like sit with it, grief as a friend. And I think within that, like, I always think about God being in that grief, about how God is also
sitting with you,
sitting with us, weeping with us, and allowing us to just be like in the fullness of who we are. Like, this is part of our human experience. And a lot of times just people don't know how to sit with people. And I think like there's nothing to fix. There's only to be, you know, grieving does not mean that you failed or that you are failing. Grieving means that you are
hurting.
You've
lost.
Hurting.
And that could, loss can look so many different ways. You know, it doesn't even have to be an actual person that you've lost. It could be, you know, your job or your relationship with the church or your faith or the way that it's shifting and changing or your place in ministry. I mean, loss comes in so many different forms.
It really does. And all of
Absolutely.
it is valid. I think there's so many times we want to play like loss Olympics, and it's like, well, you know, this person has lost more than me. I shouldn't be that sad.
But we don't have to compare ourselves.
It all hurts. And I think what's also the other lie that I encountered in my coming out process was like, I think I just thought that like I was the only one. Like there's a big temptation to just say, I feel like, to not reach out, to not share that pain with other people because either we feel silly about asking for help or we do think that we're the only one. We do think we're like, and that's just simply not true. Like there's so many other humans who have lost and are losing, who are like right there with us. And it's so important to reach out to those.
It is. And
to ask for help.
Right. And I think it's one of the hardest steps for us as humans to take. And yet it's one of the most healing steps because you suddenly realize that you're not alone and people will sit with you if you ask them.
That was my conversation with Amber Cantorna. You can pick up her new book, Unashamed, a coming out guide for LGBTQ Christians, now wherever amazing books are sold. And be sure to pick up her first one called Refocusing My Family from Fortress Press. It's a really fantastic memoir about that whole situation. I think you're really going to love it. Amber, thanks so much for being on the show. You're amazing. Oh, and if you want to, connect with her, Amber Cantorna across social media, ambercantorna.com. All those links are below. You all know the deal. Amber, thank you for being on the show. You're the best. A Tiny Revolution is supported by 129 amazing humans on Patreon. And if you don't know what that is, then I don't think that you listen to podcasts or know anything about how we're supporting ourselves in these streets, honey. Basically, Patreon is a way for you to support the creatives in your life that are making a difference, making content that matters, making podcasts, blogs, videos about the queer Christian experience. I don't know, maybe that sounds familiar to you. But if this podcast was good for you, if this podcast you think has been helping you navigate your faith, if any of my work has really impacted you in a positive way, I'd really love for you to become a supporting partner, because it's only through supporting partners like you that I'm able to actually, get this work out there. Not to mention, very soon we're going to be releasing coupon codes for people who are $15 supporters or more, so you can get your quarterly t-shirt now that I've revamped my whole t-shirt line, which has been a journey. But go ahead and go check that out. That'd be amazing. And go ahead and tell your friends. And if you can't support the show financially, I totally understand, but there is an easy way for you to do that, and that's by leaving us a 5-star review in iTunes. Seriously, leaving a review, saying a kind word, sharing it on social media gets this in front of people who need it. So if you can't throw a dollar or two my way per month, then why don't you just, use your little tappy tap fingers on your little phony phone. Get that done, BB. You can do it. I believe in you. That's all from me, really. Once again, go purchase Amber Cantorna's book. Links are in the description box. Go check me out on the YouTubes, the Twitters, and the Instagrams, wherever I am on the internet. It's mostly at the Kevin Garcia. And drop me a line if you ever want to. I'd love to hear from you, and I will try my best to get back from you. Best way is honestly, slide into my Instagram DMs if you have something. I love you. I hope you're doing well. So till next time, make sure you go see your therapist, take your meds, drink some water, move your body, eat something delicious. Call somebody that you love and tell them that you need help. If you need help, call somebody you love and just tell them you love them just because you love them. That'd be fun. Anyways, thanks so much for tuning in again this week, you guys. I'm always amazed that we can continue to do this, especially as we're creeping up on 100 episodes, which is going to be wild. I should probably do something like something important, like a fancy episode or something. Anyways, I love you. I hope you're doing good, and I can't wait to talk to you again soon, y'all. Bye.